Hello everyone and welcome to the Sprint Zero podcast. My name is Mike Gowland and I'm here with my co-partner rat in crime, Jon Russell. Say hello, Jon.
Hello, how are you? You alright?
I am
breezy this morning, my
bright
friend.
and breezy this morning because today we've got an absolute powerhouse joining us all the way from New Zealand. Our guest is someone who's not just making waves in the tech world, but is also leading with heart, vision and a whole lot of humility. She's the driving force that, alongside her husband Mark Smith on the 90-day mentoring challenge, a champion for indigenous representation in tech, got there in the end, and a fearless advocate for inclusion. Please give a warm welcome to Meg Smith. How are you doing? Welcome to the podcast, Meg. And below are the questions we are going to ask.
Thank you so much for having me. It is an absolute pleasure to be on the podcast. I think this is the very first time I'm a guest on a podcast.
Really?
I took over Mark's MVP show to interview him a couple of weeks ago, which was a lot of fun. But yeah, this is my first time being a guest. So thank you for having me.
That's amazing. Well, we're gonna have to get you on some more. We've got a few friends of the show that I know will be interested to have you as a guest. So we'll try and work that one out for you. We can be your
You
agent.
be my agent.
Okay.
That's it.
Yeah.
Take a cut of the fee.
Nice.
50%.
So welcome to the podcast. First of all, thank you very much for everything that you do in the 90-day mentoring challenge with Mark. I think I could definitely, obviously, speak for myself, having been on it, but I know others as well. But it's really been a game changer for me as how I kind of perceive myself and how I perceive work in general. So yeah, first of all, thank you very much for that.
Look, we say all the time that the 90-day mentoring challenge is all about how much you get out of it, is all about how much you put in. And I've seen both of you, throw a huge amount of energy into the program, but also the community, which is, you make it better for everyone that's in it. So thank you for your energy in that as well.
I've got a really awful confession to make. I haven't actually completed the 90-day challenge.
What?
That never happens. It's almost as if maybe you've had a baby or life has happened. Or, I mean, not you physically had a baby, I don't think, but
it was hard work, but we got there in the end. I know I can go back to it, so I'm going to do the 90-day challenge in 365 days, I think. I don't know.
Nice. There is a lot of content in it.
But I got what I needed out of it, and I think what I have got through, which to be fair is like 85% of it, I've taken a lot from. So.
Well, I'm glad that there's value in it, even if you don't finish it. But I've found that too in some of the courses that I've done this year. I kind of, sometimes you just need to line it up with a point where you're feeling really receptive, or there's a real need in something that you're doing in your professional or personal life. And I've done that where I've bought a course, gone, this is the answer, and then I get 20% in, get my answer, and run with it. And I'm like, oh, cool, I'll come back to that when I sort of have space again to learn something new.
And I think that's the beauty of on-demand courses, right? And you see a lot of places that are doing that. But yeah, it definitely works for me as well. So Meg, I mean, we know a little bit about you with Mark and what's going on there, but could you tell us a little bit more about you, kind of like how you are, or how you've got to where you are today?
Yeah. So I actually started in advertising. So I kind of fell into the digital advertising world. I now did some work with an agency in New Zealand. When I was studying, I studied and worked full time. At the same time, I took a gap year after high school, got used to having a little bit of an income, tried to be a full-time student, realized that I missed my income. So I kind of took a route where I could do both. And I think that, must admit, I think our university systems are a bit different. In New Zealand, there's a bit more flexibility, like when you, I studied English, but I also got to choose a range of option papers. Like I think one paper I did was called History at the Movies, where you watched a movie like Gladiator and then you wrote a paper about how it was historically inaccurate. I mean, that's just watching a movie. I would have done that anyway. So I had this kind of luxury of getting some professional experience at the same time that I was studying, and that really lined me up to really be the entry into Google. So I joined Google after spending about 3 years at an advertising agency, and that that kind of took my life in a direction I never really expected. Google is a company that meant that I could live overseas. We were in Australia with Google originally, and then they moved us to London, which is where Mark got really involved in the dynamics and the Power Platform community up there. And then ultimately they moved us home as well. So I did a range of roles at Google. When I was in London, I was doing sales for Google Analytics Premium, so their sort of enterprise version. And then when I came home to New Zealand, I was working with agencies, which I really liked. So small, independently owned agencies, so much closer to the small businesses who were, really caring about the results that their ads were driving and thinking about their marketing really strategically, which I liked. And then I kind of had this moment. I was on maternity leave with my second child, and there was this big change in the organization that I was part of, my specific part of Google. I kind of ended up at this crossroads where I wasn't without a role. I wasn't laid off, which I think was a very fortunate position to be in, given what was going on at the time. This is last year. But I sort of had to sit down and look at the new role, and it was a very different role than what I had done. I had always done very partnership-driven roles. I really liked working with people over a long period of time and kind of bringing the technology benefits in a language that made sense to them. Those were the things that I really loved doing. And this role that I had sort of been popped into was, basically sales of like getting people to spend more on their revenue, talking to 70 accounts in a quarter. You might talk to someone once, and basically the gist of your conversation should be you should spend a lot more on your advertising than you currently are. And it just didn't feel like where I wanted to take my career. And so I spent some time thinking about what was I good at and what did I like about the jobs that I'd done, and how could I structure an opportunity to do more of those things. And that's what I did. So we had already had a few things going on in our business that Mark set up when he was in London. And I kind of got to step into a few of those things and create a few of my own. So one of the things that I've done this year is kind of take that insight around being the translator for what technology can do and how we talk about it, to talk to people who are not in tech and don't necessarily live in that world. And particularly around AI, I'm taking a program around how can we be thinking about AI in our businesses and in our professional careers, even if it's not a tech background that we've had. So that's a program that I've developed and rolled out in New Zealand this year, which has been really rewarding.
And have you been working with New Zealand government as well?
Yeah, so I got an opportunity that I feel incredibly lucky to have had it, and I don't quite know how it happened, but I got to be part of a delegation on behalf of the New Zealand government that actually came up to the UK. We came to Paris and Dublin and London for Tech Week, and that was really off the back of when after Brexit, the free trade agreement between New Zealand and the UK and New Zealand and the EU had to be rewritten. And for the first time, that free trade agreement included a chapter on indigenous cooperation, so Māori economic cooperation. And that was those are the first free trade agreements in the world to sort of include that and acknowledge the role of the indigenous economy in New Zealand. And yeah, so the organisation that I came with sent 10 women tech leaders, women in tech. They thought, if we're going to, define what this economic communication or cooperation rather looks like, we think it should be future forward, not sort of rear focus. And that's what we came up with, women in tech. And so I got to, represent New Zealand, but also meet a whole bunch of people across the governments and the places we were visiting, as well as the New Zealand government agencies that exists in those markets to help bring New Zealand companies to the world. So it was just, I just kind of took it all as a learning opportunity, and it's really changed the way that I think about what I want to achieve professionally in my life as well.
You stayed humble and curious.
100%. Yeah, that was and I think the in the build up to it, it happened very, very quickly. It actually it was a quick turnaround, and I had a 10-day trip to a friend's wedding in Dublin, or outside of Dublin. But I had kind of looked at, okay, from New Zealand to get to the UK and Europe, it takes you 2 days to travel each way. And so I have my 2 young kids. They were 3 and 1 at the time, and Mark and I were working it out, and it was like, well, we don't want to take them. That sounds really hard. I'll go on my own. And it sort of started from this like 10-day trip in May that sounded a little bit impossible, but we worked it out, and it was going to be really good for me, and I was going to be my own person again in the world and go to this wedding. And then just before that trip, I get this phone call to say, oh, and by the way, for 2 weeks in June, would you like to go on this trip, this life-changing, free trip back up there? And I just looked at Mark, and he said straight away, you have to go. Don't worry, we'll figure it out. You have to go. So I ended up, having been away from the kids for maybe 1 or 2 nights at most, to then doing 10 days. And then he came up to Europe for Dynamics Minds while I was home. And then I turned around and went again. And it was really hard, but so worth it. And I think sometimes when I've spoken with parents, particularly with mothers who are working and who are, making choices around how they spend their time, there's a lot of guilt that can come into it, right? Around like, where should I be, and am I doing the right thing? And increasingly, it's all parents that I speak to. They're like, I want to be with my family. I want to be present. It's so important. And I do agree with that. Absolutely. But I was able to reframe it for this period of time in my mind to go, do you know what? My children are safe. They're loved. They're well supported. We've got a great village of around us. They are so safe. And me going and doing this thing and being this example for them, maybe that's giving them something. Maybe I'm not taking away from them. Maybe I'm giving them something. Maybe I'm going to change the way that they're thinking about the world. And it was really, I kind of felt, really, that was the mantra I took. And then I kind of took it as like, I'm here. Mark's moving heaven and earth to make this happen for me. I have to get my head and heart right and just throw everything at this, like be the best version I can be, because otherwise it's a bit of a slight to him and to the kids. Like, it's kind of a bit rude not to at that point. And then I got this video when I was in London, and I'd been sending, like, typical kids, like, I'd been sending the videos of the trains and the buses, and like, they love it all. And our kids love to move the furniture around the dining chairs and make it into a bus. They play bus. And then I get this video and they're playing London Bus. And I was just like, oh, that whole thing of like, something that was not even in the realm of possibility now is something that
they're connected
something
with you like that.
Exactly. And one day they will go there themselves, and it will be part of what they hope and dream for themselves, I hope.
Did they do the Cockney accents as well?
No, that's a missed opportunity. I'll give Mark that note. He should have taught them, if I'm honest.
Oh, yeah. Actually, I want to hear Mark do a Cockney accent, but I don't know if we'll be able to get him back on the show to do that. I just want to go back to a point you made earlier, Meg, about the fact that you're trying to translate how AI can be used in business. There's been quite a lot of talk on LinkedIn lately. I've seen a few posts here and there about Copilot's been a failure and that Microsoft haven't got it right. What are your thoughts on that? And I think a lot of the context is around the fact that that they're getting people to essentially create their own LLMs in the end. So it's not really the answer to everything that it was touted to be.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see the criticism, and like, I follow the commentary a bit, and then I'm also inside of Microsoft at times. We do some work where we are creating programs alongside their sales teams to help around this, making sense of the narrative. And I think the first thing I think of is I just have a lot of empathy for people who are in these roles at companies, making decisions, at partners like yourselves, actually building solutions. At the, things are changing so quickly. One of the crazy things I heard just recently was that in the public-facing, so Microsoft 365 Copilot off the shelf, it's getting new features every 2 weeks. Now, that means that if you're assessing what you can do with it, and therefore when you might need to extend it with connectors, or you might need to build on top of it, or you might need to build something completely bespoke in Azure AI Studio, you're building on shifting ground. And so I think the first thing I start with is it is hard, but at the same time, I think it's easy to say, oh, it's a failure, as if we can write it off now and move on. I think that's wrong fundamentally. And I think that the narrative and the sort of the ecosystem strength of what Microsoft brings is a real advantage. And I think that we do a lot of talking and coaching around what are the things that will be true even as the specific features or the name of the product might change. And I think that's the way that organizations who are winning with AI, who are moving forward with Copilot, it's because they've committed to the ecosystem. And if I'm really honest, if I put back on my Google hat, if you're in Google Workspace, if your data sits in there, absolutely you should be going all in on that, right? But for the organizations that are using Teams, are using Outlook, have their data stored in SharePoint, Copilot makes sense.
Yeah.
And even we talk about scenarios of, say, there've been some real scenarios of Copilot rolled out, so M365 Copilot rolled out the wrong security in place around certain documents, or just none. Like the phrase that I think it was Andrew on the Ecosystems podcast formed was security by obscurity.
Yeah.
It was always there unsecured, but it wasn't findable or wasn't easily findable. Now Copilot goes in, it's really findable. And you hear some of those stories about, information coming out that shouldn't be. I think it's such a risk to completely pull Copilot out of an organization and go, and there's necessary work that needs to be done with Purview and securing your data, absolutely. But you should still empower people with AI in the form of M365 Copilot, in my opinion, even if it's really locked down at the SharePoint level. If all it is, they can access what they can access. But because I think we're teaching people to work in an entirely different way. And if you completely take it out and say, no, bad, come back in 18 months when we've sorted our data security out, then all of those people, there's two things that happen, right? They either do nothing and they don't start to work with an AI chatbot, and they kind of just wait and stall. And we know from our own experience that applied knowledge is what gets you moving forward and changing the way that you sit down to interface with it. So they either do nothing and miss that opportunity, or they use, and we know this from the data, they bring their own. They get ChatGPT up alongside them, and they're copying and pasting, and they're moving data in a very insecure way. Because I think that we need to be giving people an opportunity to have hands-on learning to change their thinking.
And I think it's as soon as you start to take it out, or you just don't do your due diligence on the implementation, and you have to take it out for whatever reason, whether it's security, whether it's just lack of adoption, whether it's cost, you send the wrong message and you lose that adoption piece, right? You've lost the users at that point, because it was touted as being the answer. It's then being shown as not being the answer, right?
I think
even if you bring it back, it's probably not going to have the same adoption, because the users will have that mindset. And I think Jon has some experience with something similar, not AI, but when you worked at the BBC, you had something with a system that was put in place, and you had to go around and help.
So that was I was working on a portal that interfaces between their IT third-party provider and the rest of the BBC, and it just wasn't launched very well. And it was touted as this kind of like solution that would solve all of these problems for people who were procuring IT software and hardware, but they hadn't really listened to the users properly. And the users that were using it, they were, production managers, people that were working in studios and stuff. And a side part of their job was to order IT equipment, software and hardware. And launching that portal made it very difficult for them because there was a lot of problems with it. And that was my first kind of proper foray into like trying to listen to people properly. And we were going. Me and the project manager at the time were going. This is a long time ago, like early 2000s. We were going around offices, and I remember we went to Glasgow, and we went into the room with a group of all of these people, and I really felt a little bit scared because I thought they were gonna like not do anything physically to us, but it did feel like someone was going to throw a tomato at the stage. Like it was that bad. I just wanted to go back to that point that you mentioned, Meg, about that changing landscape. I think the issue is yes, Copilot's the changing landscape, but actually security isn't. Security is the constant, right? So this conversation is well timed because I'm about to take my security SC 900 exam today, and I've been reading about that, and two of the core components about that is zero trust and assuming breach. Now, if you put that in the context of Copilot, it's not Copilot's fault that the data isn't secure. It's the security posture of the organization and that they haven't potentially follow best practice before implementing Copilot. That's the issue. And I think what we need to do is reframe the Copilot is changing, it's AI, blah, 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 blah. Well, actually, no, go back to first principles, get your security right first. And I know that sounds very obvious, but it feels like, just from reading that part in the last couple of days, that assume breach bit, I never really thought about that before. Like you need to, as a security consultant or as someone who's working in the security space for your organization, you need to assume that a breach is going to happen and do everything you can to prevent that. Yeah,
100%. Yeah, and that's why when you're building security models, like you have to make sure that you're not giving, say, like a delete permission to the wrong kind of user.
Yeah,
not that they're being malicious of it, but like they could make that mistake quite easily.
I think it's an important clarification, right? And that when we talk, if I'm talking with a board, because I do a little bit of advisory on AI governance or just governance generally, when we talk about some of the risks with AI, we go straight into this should be in your data policy. This should not be new. They're like, we shouldn't have this extra thing. We have to do all this extra work. I'm like, no. It's building on what's there. What's in your privacy policy? What's in your data policy? What are your, as you said, like systems and things like that in place to support that. And I think, but you also touched there, Jon, on the important thing that we see over and over again in successful implementations, or not just implementations, in successful AI strategies, is it involves an AI council, right? A diverse and empowered team of people from across different roles, including frontline roles, who can say things like, we would never do it in that way, or you've missed this blind spot. And it's great that technically the system can do that, but we don't actually have that data.
And guess what? It's the same as running a workshop. Having the right people in the room at the right time and listening to them. It's the same thing. It comes up again and again and again. It's
ironic, isn't it? Because
things are listening to people and making sure you have diverse representation. Yes, 100%.
So it's ironic because we frame technology and we talk about software as if it's this magic bullet that's going to come in and solve all the problems. But at the end of the day, it doesn't mean anything if no one's using it. It's the people that are using it.
It's the people that are the magic, actually.
Sorry, that's right.
It is.
It is, and then the change and adoption conversation. Like I was really fortunate to do my ProSci training this year, and that for me, so that's the change management program that Microsoft recommend and use themselves. And from that, it just made it so clear to me that that is where we're going to either win with AI or lose with AI, and put AI in the bucket of digital transformation, right? And each time you have a change process, you're at the user level, and then ultimately that rolls up to the organizational level. You're building on that experience. So if you have a bad experience, and we're talking again like in AI, right? Sit down, use Copilot, you type in a question or you say a question, and then you get an outcome that's not great, or the tool gets removed from your device altogether or from your login altogether, then that's the legacy on which you're building. And then you instead of going up a step, you've gone down a couple of steps with that user. And then so in order to have a moment of change where they change the way that they work in the future, you've got to work even harder. So for me, that was the like kind of aha moment where we go, actually, we're looking to create organizational change. We talk about all the organizational benefits, but that has to happen for each person in the organization.
Yeah.
It's just, I was just thinking of a point where, obviously, I've heard this before around, but you can have a solution looking for a problem. And I think if you're touting technology as being the silver bullet that's going to solve everything, it's a solution looking for a problem. Whereas actually, what you need is a problem looking for a solution, right? And that's the mindset you need to take in.
Design thinking principles, right?
It is, yeah.
Start with the problem, and
that.
That's what I learned when I was at Amazon. They start with the customer first, so the customer can raise a problem, can raise an issue, and that becomes what their focus is, rather than doing something to the customer, which they might not.
Is that like some people would call that reactive, though, wouldn't they? And that can be a good and bad thing. So you can be reactive to like business, and it's usually ends in tears. So if you react to market changes and whatnot, you could be too slow to adopt. But then at the same time, what you're saying is actually you could be reactive to users' needs. Yes. That's actually a good thing, because you're taking the context from actual people who are using your services, not making assumptions, which a lot of companies have been guilty of doing.
Yeah, and they're spending the time to define the problem and go, are we really working, like, do we really understand, and are we agreed? And are we agreed that this is the most important problem to solve at the moment? And getting that buy-in through design thinking workshops and different techniques, I think is really important.
It was the longest introduction I think we've ever had.
Great.
And you thought Mark was the talker.
No, but it's great. It's great. So, Meg, you've spoken about the importance of defining your own vision for success. For those listening who might feel overwhelmed by external expectations, what steps do you recommend for carving out a personal and authentic path to success?
Yeah, I think I do talk about it a lot. I think I talk about that, like, my life started to get really good when I stopped chasing the generic version of success and actually stopped and thought, what do I want? And I was talking to someone about this recently, and so I have an answer of where I think you should start, and it's based on where I started, and it's really around understanding your values. And I think for me, that was an iterative process over the course of, growing up and being intentional about those. Some of them I inherited from my upbringing and my family, and some of them have evolved over time. I think when you think about your values, you obviously think about them individually, but also if you are in a partnership and in a relationship or in a family scenario, there's a point at which you need to align on your values and work out or negotiate or agree where that might be. So Mark and I have done a lot of that over the years. And one of the values that has sort of been core, I remember talking about it in one of our very early conversations. We've been together more than 16 years. And one of the early conversations, he said to me one of the things that he really kind of valued more than anything was freedom. And freedom has been a consistent for both of us, though the definition has changed. At different times, it has looked like becoming free from debt, right? We had a lot of debt at one point, and then seeking freedom from that was one big step. sometimes it was freedom of fixed abode. We sold all our things when we left Sydney and went with some backpacks and spent some time backpacking around the world. And that was freedom from physical place, but actually it was also freedom from expectation. A lot of the people in our lives, when we did that, said, "You're crazy. Like, what are you doing? You should be buying a house. You should be settling down and having kids," and putting their expectations on us. Actually, at the time, someone even said to Mark, "I predict you will be back in 3 months divorced." And I said to him, Mark, when he told me that, I was like, I think that says more about their relationship than it says about ours.
Yeah.
Because people do put, or they put their own pressures onto you sometimes. And so it was a practice to get to the point of, first, what do I value? Next, what do we value together? And what might that look like in our personal and professional lives, which are increasingly intertwined. You can't really separate the two. I used to be about work-life separation, and now I'm all about work-life integration.
I think, yeah, because a lot of people will say that, oh, you shouldn't blur the lines between work and life balance. I think we had a guest on in fact, last week, who talked about actually how that can be a bad thing if you're merging the two together. But actually, if you love what you do, you can make it part of who you are. And I think, my career aspirations is that I enjoy the job I do. Like that's core to me. Like, if I hate the job I do, I spend most of my time working. If I hate it,
yeah,
I don't really want to do it.
No.
Yeah,
and
there's been times
work is such a major part of your life. Like, why not find something that
Yeah,
you're gonna get?
It's like investing in a good mattress, isn't it? You spend so much of your time lying on it. Like, don't.
Yeah.
There's a really good bit of advice that I've heard, and it's that you should invest heavily in the things that separate you from the ground.
Oh, I like that. And actually, this is
good.
perfectly timed because I actually woke up this morning mad at my mattress, and I was like, right, I should not live like this. I need to solve this problem.
Basically, everything comes back to one of the best things that I ever learned when I was doing. I got to like level 3 in counselling, and it's my favourite diagram. And actually, you can relate it to pretty much everything. All of the stuff we've been talking about today can relate back to it, and that's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So, like, you have a good foundation, and then you build on that foundation. That's exactly what we were talking about. Copilot and security. Security is the foundation, and what we're talking about here, it's the same. It's the same deal. A mattress for someone, a mattress to sleep on, and a home is a big, big deal. It's
Yeah. And when you have that, then you can worry about the next thing up the pyramid,
yeah.
right?
And that's why, I think, not to get super deep, but homelessness for people is a major issue because it's right into your core primary need.
Well, yeah. Terrifying prospect.
Yeah.
And also, you can have more empathy for why, something that if you're thinking about it, or I'm thinking about it from all the things I have. Oh, if I was in that position, I would do X, Y, Z. But actually, I can't fully put myself into that position, into that person's shoes, because I'm not at the same level, right? And so if we can help solve that for someone, what does it unlock?
Yeah. You and Mark obviously emphasize the importance of developing a humble and curious mindset. So in like this fast-paced world where, confidence is often required and key, how do you balance humility with the need to be able to assert your ideas and expertise?
Yeah, I have kept this phrase of humble and curious at the center of my career since I left Google and started to go down this path of AI enablement and sort of digital literacy, because it really is an ego killer. And ego gets us into trouble because if we lead with our confidence or our I know everything about that, I'm the expert on that, which it has been the role of technologists, right? And we have been the person who knows the most about things. And that's the role we're invited to play and add value. But the flip side of that, or maybe the risk of that, is that you can have really big blind spots if you take that approach. And also that miss the value that other people's perspectives bring if you've taken that approach. I love Humble and Curious because it kind of reminds me to be humble enough to ask a question when I don't know the answer, to not let my idea of who I'm supposed to be in a room stop me from stopping the conversation and saying, actually, I'm not sure what you mean by that. Can you tell me a little bit more? And curiosity, I find, is a real fear killer, because so much of people's, like we talked just before about getting to the point where you're so frustrated at work, you want to throw something at the person that's coming in with the new piece of technology. It's so much of that is based on fear of irrelevance, fear of not understanding where things are going. And almost the antidote to that can be, hey, I'm curious what you mean by that. I'm curious how this will change where I am right now. And I use that phrase as when I'm feeling like I've been doing this a lot this week. I'm like, I feel like really up here. My shoulders are up by my ears, and I'm feeling a bit tense. If I can say to myself, I'm curious about whatever it might be, then it's like a nervous system relaxant for me, and it makes me come at it from a more creative space than from a defensive space.
And I think it's important to accept that you might, although you might know a lot about something, you might also be wrong. And that's that can be quite empowering if you take that mindset that, well, you might be wrong, but also you need to be willing to be curious, like you say, and learn. You can look at different ways of approaching a problem.
It entertains me when I try and stay away from comment sections, but every now and then you find yourself in one, right? And you see the people that are quoting a scientific fact or saying, this is fact, this is scientific fact. And I mean, I can remember from my high school science education that it's all theory. These are theories and hypotheses that are not yet disproved. And so there is room in science to be wrong or to have a different theory when you have new evidence.
And I think it's celebrated being wrong as well, isn't it, in science?
Because it means learning.
Yeah.
I'm not a scientist, by the way.
Neither am I. John's a secret scientist.
Yeah, got my lab coat somewhere, yeah.
So, Meg, how do you see the intergenerational impact of creating opportunities, and what changes are you most hopeful to see in the industry?
I really love this question because how I see it has developed this year, particularly into what you'd call an indigenous worldview, right? And that is all about how can we be led by our ancestors because we're focused on our mokopuna, our grandchildren, the generations that come behind us. So at the same time as how can we learn from the knowledge of those that have gone before us and be thinking about leaving a better legacy, being a good ancestor to the next 2, 3, 400 years of generations that come next to us. And I think that for me is why it's so important that we continue to see more diversity in the people who are building our technology, who are using our technology, who are feeding information and perspectives into LLMs. Because if we don't, that is a huge risk for everybody. I think so much of it comes down to visibility and sharing your voice and owning the perspective that you have, while staying humble and curious, like we just talked about.
So, obviously, I know that you're an Indigenous woman in tech, which we've spoke about a little bit before already, and like your visibility is obviously very important. How do you navigate the responsibility of that kind of representation while also pushing for greater inclusion? And what advice would you give to other unrepresented groups or individuals who are striving to kind of make a mark in this field or, their field?
Yeah, I think that my experience has been that if you are being authentic to who you are, then people will value you from that space. And that can be a hard space to step into because we feel like sometimes we don't own things. I have pale skin. I look like what we'd call a Pākehā, a European person, right? But in Māori culture, whakapapa is undeniable. That's your genealogy. So through my dad, I know my genealogical ties, and I know that my role is different from someone who was raised in very deep, unbroken lines of indigenous knowledge and power. And my role might be to connect people into what they might be saying, right? And to connect the world of tech and of corporates into these indigenous knowledge systems, and that the two can benefit from each other. So one of the best pieces of career advice I got many years ago from who's now the VP of Google in Australia and New Zealand, she said, structure your life or your career around the question of what can only I do? What doesn't get done if I don't do it? And then that will mean that you're playing a role that is both as large as your potential, but also not so overwhelming that you're taking on the weight of the world, and it's more than any one person should carry.
Yeah. It's really interesting, and I don't mean to be like, how can I say this? Like
God,
I'm not. No,
hang on.
no.
Let me get prepared for this. Add a marker. Make some notes.
I'm not like.
What's he going to come out with now?
I think I just would like to experience more indigenous people. Like we don't really have that in the UK as such. The UK is made up of multiple different, languages and cultures and people. But I remember when I went to Arizona and ended up speaking to like these Native Americans, and I was like, I don't know, I just felt very connected to them because they were very, I don't know, that they'd never met me. They were very calm. And yeah, I don't know. It's hard to explain it. I don't know.
I get what you mean though, because there are. I've had experiences too where a worldview or an experience or a belief that I didn't know was in me is suddenly brought to the surface by being exposed to somebody who just lives that and is that, and suddenly it makes sense. And I think that's the universality of human connection. That at the end of the day, if we can be curious and listen to other people, which is what this conversation has been about, right? And also, sometimes I think in conversations with, I even found this because I grew up in much more of like what we'd call like a Western world or a Western mindset. And I have had the privilege now in my adulthood and in my career often to sit in spaces that are Indigenous spaces. And I have to sit there with myself and go, my brain isn't used to these structures. The structure is different. This way of doing things is different. And it can feel really uncomfortable. And we have this thing inside of us to kind of put it to rights or put it back into the order that we're used to. But when you have those opportunities, you can sit and listen and go, it might not fully make sense to me, but I'm just going to sort of take this at face value and go away and reflect on it. Then I think that's what allyship is, right? It's going, there's space for both here. I don't have to fully understand it, but I can still, we use the word toe talk, or we can support it. We can say, this is valuable, and, there's space to hear that. And I think often if you are in, part of an underrepresented group, whether that's in your gender, in your nationality, in your sexual orientation, in your religious view, whatever it might be, I think often that's what we want, right? We just want to know that there's space for us, and that that people might be interested to learn a bit more about an experience that's different than their own.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. Mike, I know, sorry, I'll just put a clip in the thing, but do you want to do the uncomfortable corner bit? Probably.
If you want me to.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me just compose myself. Meg, have you listened to the podcast before?
I sure have.
So we have a regular section called Uncomfortable Corner. I don't know why John wanted me to do that, but okay. So, Meg,
I really enjoyed it.
I can do it
really
again if you
enjoyed
want.
Scary the second time.
It's very spooky. It's giving Halloween.
Very spooky. That's it. Yeah, new one, actually. So, Meg, when was the last time you felt uncomfortable, whether that was in or out of work? Explain how you felt, how you managed to get through it, and what did you learn from it?
I have a great example from this week, actually. And similarly to some of what I was just talking about in the difference of thinking, when I was in a conversation with two people who were who think differently than me. I'm not a psychologist. It's not for me to diagnose them, but I would say it was, more of, say, an ADHD or dyslexia type thinking, which is a superpower. And I, grateful to be in the room. But what I was finding was in my mind, I was seeing two people riff on ideas and have an ability to think much bigger than what my brain was trying to do. My brain was trying to put it into a box, put it into a table, put it into a to-do list of what do we do next? How does this work? And I was starting to get a bit anxious. So I was thinking, we have these constraints, we have this deadline, we have, how are we going to do this? And then I just had this check in myself as a video call to sort of just sit back and go, just let their process work. You're not actually part of it. This isn't about you. And just kind of step out of it. And because part of my talk track as part of that too was if I don't get these things right, if I don't get my to-do list and I know really clearly what I need to do out of this, I'm going to fail. And if I fail at this thing, I'm a bad person. It goes deep down into those kind of childhood insecurities of tick the box and do what's right. But I really noticed, and it was a new thing to go, oh, hang on. I've seen these two people work like this before. Maybe I don't actually need to be in this process right now, and I can just suspend my need to find an action here, let them get where they're going. And in fact, maybe my brain can have a break. Maybe my brain just has a little wander over here for a minute.
Suspend your ego.
Suspend my ego. Exactly. And literally I had in my head, it's not about you. This part of the conversation isn't about you. It's not a criticism of you, so you can shut up about, worrying about your self-worth and all the rest of it and your role to play here. It's about two people who are riffing on an idea, and actually, do you know what? They got to a really great place. I had a really clear action. I knew exactly where it was. So I felt uncomfortable, but by the end of it, I was like, okay, I've now got a much better way to work in a group with these two people, to actually maybe encourage them to spend time doing that, because we might get to a better outcome for everybody at the end of it.
Yeah, that's really good. That kind of self-awareness is pretty. I think it's pretty hard to get to that level of self-awareness to actually think, well, because it's like you're there to do a job, or you're there to facilitate. So therefore, really it should be me that's kind of controlling the room, but actually not in this case, and knowing when to step in and when not.
But there's two sides to facilitation, isn't there? That there is controlling the narrative and getting to the end product, but also there's removing the blockers. So
yeah,
it's also important to not when there's a creative process going on like that, and that actually if you just leave them to it, they're going to come to the answer. Actually, what you don't want to do is stop them from doing that.
Yeah, because you become the blocker, right?
Exactly, and you can take that mentality into driving. I was talking to you at the weekend, John, about somebody on YouTube. I've been watching a lot of his videos. A guy called Ashley Neal, who's a driving instructor in the UK, and he talks a lot about when you come to pinch points and confrontations in driving, actually you should prioritise getting the traffic flow rather than trying to get to your destination.
Yeah,
and it kind of ties back into that. If you help the flow of traffic, everyone gets to where they need to go quicker.
Yeah.
I love that. And I will say too, I have been working in this dynamic for 18 months. So it's taken me to get to that level of self-awareness. I've had a lot of failures or frustration calls, or I've been the blocker. I'm now realizing, right? I've probably said, no, we need to this and forced away from what could have been a really great insight. And I've been learning about different ways of thinking and dyslexic thinking and ADHD powers and stuff. And so now my brain is going, okay, look for an opportunity where you can get out of the way and see the magic work rather than trying to change it.
I mentioned it a couple of times, Meg, but there's a Open University course that's just started called University of Dyslexic Thinking. You might want to have a look at that. It's really, really good. And I think
that's right.
It's free. It's been sponsored by like Richard Branson and also this lady called Katie Grigg, I think her name is, and she runs a charity called Made by Dyslexia.
I love their content
really
on
good.
Instagram. The Made by Dyslexia channel is so great.
Yeah. So, Meg, thank you very much for joining us today. It's been a really, really great conversation.
It has.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time in your evening to speak to us. Links to your LinkedIn and also to the 90-Day Mentoring Challenge will obviously be in our show notes. And any other links or resources that we've used will also be there too. Music today was provided by our friend Ken Likefit. You can find his music on Spotify, the link to which you can find in the episode show notes. Any additional music used in this episode will also be credited there. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss the next episode, and we'd really appreciate it if you could give us a follow on LinkedIn. Earlier on in the week, I did a really big maths boo-boo. So I said that we were 8
You really did.
8 people away from 1,000 subscribers on LinkedIn. We were actually 88. So yeah, well done, John.
It's even worse, John, because we were actually like 108 away.
Yeah, we were 108. Oh my God.
You know who runs the numbers on this podcast, right?
I was going to say,
it's not John.
Look, we've established we're not scientists. John, I also am not a mathematician, so I'm right there with you, mate.
Mental arithmetic and me just doesn't work. So if you're enjoying the podcast and you want to help us get to that, 108 number, whatever it is, please give us a review as well on your chosen podcast platform. Thank you very much.
On the road to 937 subscribers.
Yeah. So this has been Sprint Zero. We've been Mike Gowland. Say goodbye, Mike.
Goodbye, Mike.
And goodbye, Meg. Thank you very much for being on here. Really appreciate it.
Ka kite, thank you for having me.
And I'm John, and we'll see you on the next episode of Sprint Zero. Love you, Mike.
Love you, John.
Love you, Meg.
Love you, John.
I didn't get a love you.
Oh.
Rude.
Hold on. You can't cut this. You're gonna say love you, Meg. That's why you didn't.
Love you, Meg.
You didn't. I was gonna say I was just waiting for you to go first. Love you, Mike.
Yay.
Yeah.